and we're joined now live in the studio by the Agriculture Minister, Barnaby Joyce. Thanks for your company.
You're welcome, Peter.
Can I ask you, we were just talking, you would have heard it in the green room, we were talking to the Shadow Treasurer about their plans for what they would spell out before the election. He didn't really give us anything, but it was at least comforting, would you agree, to know that there will be some details there before the election. It's been a long-term era of small government in the lead-up to elections.
Well, Peter, let me give you a review from what I heard. He's going to not be a small ball. It's going to be a year of ideas. He's going to have credible plans. There's going to be equity in the taxation system. We don't want thought bubbles. We're going to consult. It's not about the individual, it's about overarching ideas. It's a trilogy, almost religious now. It underpins a fiscal approach. Australia is a large country. Now, there's a news flash. Australia's a large country, and there are millions of people living in Sydney. Now, I haven't had so many ideas since the castle. That's like Steve and Wayne having a chat. There is nothing there. What I do know is they don't support changes to university fees. They don't support changes to Medicare. They don't believe in poles and wires. There's nothing. This is, in fairness, sooner or later, people have to say, they've got to call BS on this.
But on something like Medicare, I'm not actually sure what the government's position is anymore. You had Alan Tudge saying that the rebate was gone on radio, but then we've had other messages coming out of other ministers in the government. Where are some of these policies at? Well,
we tried to put something up, and if the Labor Party have got to realise that if they want to be the government, they're actually going to end up with, I just saw it the other day, $356,000 million in debt. Went up $4 billion the other day. If that was a company, it'd be in the top half of the top 200 in capitalisation. That's how serious things are getting. It'd be one of the top 3% companies in Australia, and that's just the latest increment in the debt. At $356 billion, it'd be by far and away the biggest company on the Australian Stock Exchange. It'd be almost 3 times the size of the Australian capitalisation of BHP. And we're saying this is not a problem. We tried to get something through. They could have come back to us if they were a diligent opposition, a responsible member of the Australian economic community, and even said, look, we don't agree with that, but we know you've got to try and turn the financial position around because that's responsible. So let's talk about this. But it was nothing. It was just like, no matter what you put up, even their own ideas, would have been a lot harder.
Would have been a lot harder for them, though, if the details of what you've tried to do but been obstructed in the Senate from doing were spelled out in opposition.
Well, we are now going to try once more again with the AMA to come up with some proposal. Everybody knows what we're trying to do here. If we hadn't been left in this position, we wouldn't have to make these choices. But they left us in this position, and now we've got to turn the show around. If we don't, whether Labor gets back in or whether we stay there, if we can't turn the financial position around, then whether it's 5, 10, 15 or 20 years' time, at a point in the future, we will go broke. It has to, because you can't live on this trajectory of debt increase and think that there's no ramifications. Now, I think I've got some form in this. I said it back in 2009 and got sacked for it as the Shadow Finance Minister. Now, and that time Martin Parkinson said it was rubbish. Now we've got everybody out there saying, no, it's the truth. And guess what? It is. It is the truth. And I really want the alternate Treasurer of Australia, because we are putting up ideas. We even put up $5 billion of their ideas, which they knocked back. And I want the ideas man to come back and say, well, here are my ideas. So instead of listening to Steve and Wayne from the castle, we can start listening to Chris and Bill from the Labor Party and start giving us their ideas about how they will turn the situation around. Otherwise, have the dignity to say they've got no ideas, and let us try and do our bit to try and help them out in the future.
Minister, just on the topic of debt, I mean, you're clearly very passionate about the importance of paying it down. We are currently seeing in Australia the lowest interest rates for the government, I think, on record in history. I mean, the Commonwealth government can borrow at 10 years for something like 2.5%, which is unprecedented. Yep. So surely then, I mean, it's a big country, as Chris Bowen said earlier, there is a strong case for actually borrowing a lot more and spending on infrastructure at this time, taking advantage of these low interest rates.
What you've got is you've got obviously, if you can get a liability, little old bush account, if you get a liability and you put an asset beside it, you're in a better position than if you get a liability and just use it on general day-to-day expenditure, which was the flaw of the Labor Party. It was that you either had what they called impaired assets, that's you borrowed a heap of money and invested in something where the value just wasn't there, such as the school halls, or worse than that, you borrowed a heap of money, invested in ceiling insulation, which is just dead.
But are you comfortable with the sort of debt that Adam Crichton's talking about?
If you can build, good debt. If you can build infrastructure that adds to your economic base, then there is definitely a case there. But it has to be realisable. Obviously, the reason you can privatise poles and wires, as they want to in New South Wales, is because it's a realisable asset. it has value.
So what sort of things is the government doing to formalise this process to borrow money to pay for infrastructure, roads and rail?
Well, we're doing it all the time. I mean, I can name you a whole range of infrastructure that will add to our nation's base and grow it. And the big one for me, a close one in my heart, the inland rail. We're borrowing $300 million, goes into the ARTC. That ARTC becomes a bigger asset, sits on your balance sheet. It helps reduce our intermodal transport costs so that we can become competitive with other countries. And I'll give you a classic example here. I was speaking to a guy from St George the other day, John Lindors, and he said for him to move grain to the port, for him to get it from St George to the port, $100 a tonne. Now that means that a vast majority of the reason for you to grow it is gone. To go from Alberta in Canada to the port, 12. So you can see that there's huge discrepancies, and an investment there brings real returns back to the nation and also leaves you with a realisable asset, and it can sit on your balance sheet and actually give strength to what you've got.
Mr Joyce, you have been a persistent advocate about paying down debt and budget repair, but are you surprised about a report in the Australian, which has not been denied, from last week, which shows that even if the government's savings measures pass the Senate, that in this fiscal year the government still would have spent more money than it would have saved, in the order of $200 million. So the point of that is the government is still spending more than it's saving, even if they had a cooperative Senate. That must be a frightening statistic for someone like you.
Well, it is. One of the problems we've got, it is like coming back to the household after someone's had a big night on the Terps and has been watching late night TV and has bought every contract on the shopping channel, every contract, and we're tied up to it. And we've got to try and turn that around. But the process of turning it around is, first of all, to turn the trajectory of your borrowings around, and then to try and head towards a surplus. Now, there is nothing the Labor Party has done as a responsible opposition, because you've got to remember, we can get things through the Senate if the Labor Party votes for them, even if they come up with a plan, even if they have the decency to sit down at the table, as we say, with whether it's university charges or whether it's Medicare or it's co-payments, all these things, because it doesn't matter where you go, you're going to be doing something that people don't like.
Yeah, but I think the point is that even if those savings measures were passed, the government would still be spending more money than they're saving.
But the trajectory we're on at the moment, it's actually trying to reduce that proponent. If we stay where we are, which is the status quo, because Labor is just blocking everything, and we talk about the crossbenchers, the responsibility of the alternate government. The people who show their colours as an alternate government are the Labor Party. Now, if we don't get these changes through, then, and even if they won the next election, we would just hand them. I'll give you something interesting. I was talking to a Labor Party politician last night, and he had a very salutary word of advice. Be very careful what you block, because later on you will find out that you wish you had passed it.
All right, hold that thought. We need to take a break. We're talking to the Agriculture Minister, Barnaby Joyce. When we come back, foreign investment in agricultural land. That's where we'll start. Back in a moment.
With no lock-in contracts, we give you more data, so you never run out of beats. Amaze him. Say hi to more.
Hotels Combined presents clever ideas that make travel easy. Flip your sunglasses upside down and you've got a phone stand. Perfect for the plane, and it's free. Just like Hotels Combined, which quickly compares hundreds of hotel booking sites and combines them into one simple search. So finding the best deal is easy. Save on your hotel at Hotels Combined or download our free app today.
Red Rooster presents The Great Night In. Get 2 whole roast chickens for $20 and a 2-month free subscription to Quick Flicks Movies. The perfect ingredients for a great night in. Hurry, for a limited time only. Red Rooster, tender loving chicken.
So, you're looking for a hotel, but with so many sites to search and book a room, it's easy to miss the best deals. That's why there's Hotels Combined. Hotels Combined compares hundreds of sites and combines them into one simple search. You can see all hotels and all prices available, so finding the best deal is easy. Visit Hotels Combined or download our free app today.
You are the king. Play Good Game Empire in app or browser at goodgame.com.au.
Buy any product made from genuine Colorbond steel valued at $1,500 or more from a participating supplier, and you could win $150,000 in cash. Eligibility criteria apply. Ask your supplier or go online for details.
Welcome back. You're watching Australian Agenda, where Adam Crichton, Troy Bramston, Paul Kelly and I are talking to the Agriculture Minister, Barnaby Joyce.
Minister, you've reduced the scrutiny threshold for foreign investment in agriculture. What will be the consequence of this, and will it lead to a decline in the rate of increase of foreign investment?
No, it'll certainly bring about an increase in the oversight. If you're a legitimate investor looking for a legitimate return, then it goes for review. It is not ruling it out. Therefore, it goes for the Foreign Investment Review Board. And if it's legitimate and it can be seen in our national interest, or not to the detriment, to be technically correct, of our national interest, then it passes the Review Board. I cannot see the problem in this, and the Australian people overwhelmingly ask for it. It resonates whether you're in Leichhardt, where it was last night, or in Boulia in Queensland, or in Tamworth. People want to have the security that the Australian government is well in control of what's happening to the Australian soil. Now, where the anomaly we had in the past, as you well know, but your listeners may not, is that it was not a cumulative total. So someone could buy $250 million worth of property as an individual and not have to go to the Foreign Investment Review Board, then do the same transaction the next day, do the same transaction the day after that.
Were people doing that?
In smaller amounts. It was the capacity for people over an extensive period, over a period of a year, to have a creeping acquisition of assets, which on Globo were rather substantial, but it is individual transactions could escape the premise of further investigation.
But is anyone really doing it though?
Well, if you take. Well, there are. This is the whole point. I can go. I don't want to sort of wander up rivers with you and say, well, they own that water asset and they own that land asset. And if I go to here via a range of trusts and arrangements, they own a whole substantial amounts of assets. But what I did know, because I live in this industry, is even on a state level, you say, what do you think in this district? And I'd find a district I knew very well and say, what do you think is foreign owned here? And I said, well, it's just that. And he said, well, that's not correct. That is not correct. I'll take you to a whole range.
What is the overall rate of foreign ownership?
Well, the ABS statistics, and even these, you've got to remember, I would say a week in that they underestimate it, say that it is around about 11 to 12%, which, if you looked at that in real land terms, we're looking at something that is 2.3 times the size of Victoria. That is totally owned and partially foreign owned. Now, in anyone's book, that is a substantial amount of land, I hope. What the Labor Party are proposing is not reducing the threshold, but increasing the threshold to $1 billion. And if I said we have to give a rough estimation so listeners can understand, let's value land at $500 an acre, because I'm from the old school, we still talk in acres, which is across the board, a fair sort of price. You would have to buy a property in excess of 3 times the size of the Australian Capital Territory before someone even asks a question. This is absurd.
Can I ask about the white paper on agriculture? It was promised within the first year of the government. Obviously, it's been a little bit delayed. When is that coming out, and what are the kind of things we're likely to see in it?
Well, there's a whole range of. It's around about the middle of March, is what I envisaged. Where it is. I apologise for the delay, but I want, as I've said to my department, and for it to be a formidable document. The previous document, the food plan, and I'll try and build on things rather than denigrate things, but it was seen to be honestly more of a motherhood statement. If people want a motherhood statement, I could have had that out last year. We love farmers, love people with elastic-sided boots. Kubras are great. Good luck and God bless. You can get that paper out in a piece of cake. But this is I want it to be formidable. I wanted to talk about how we inspire people to prepare for droughts. So that, obviously this involves Treasury. How we make sure that people have proper provisions to deal with circumstances in the future. That's obviously the Treasury. How we make sure that the infrastructure is right. And as I mentioned before, earlier in this interview, about inland rail, about dams. Obviously that's infrastructure and how we actually finance it. This is a formidable piece of work, and as such, it takes a lot more time than was initially envisaged. And without giving too much away, I think that what we'll see here, I always planned that, I understand the fact that I won't be the Agricultural Minister forever. I want something that I can hand to the next person, whoever that may be. and say, basically follow these instructions and you can continue to have record cattle prices, record sheep prices, cotton over $500 a bale, solid grain prices, a substantial investment portfolio and a real plan with real results, because that's what we've done in agriculture, given real results.
Now, Minister, just changing the subject, you went public on the Liberal leadership. So let me ask you, how deep are the concerns in the National Party about Malcolm Turnbull as leader?
Well, it's not about that. I'll be frank. We just didn't, in the National Party, want chaos. We believe that the Australian people...
Of course, there's bolted on that one, hasn't it?
The Australian people, well, it hasn't, because the Prime Minister is still the Prime Minister. We have a cabinet that's in unity, and we just wanted to make sure that our first day back in Parliament looked like the first day of a government, and I think that's front and foremost. And I'm not saying anything extraordinary there. I'm repeating what I've said before. And I think that you just, and hopefully we've dealt with that, because in politics, from my meagre observations over 10 years, it works like this. In opposition, you can spend 100% of the time on politics because you've got nothing else to do. In government, you spend about 20% of the time on politics and 80% doing your job, making sure you're looking after the farmers, turning things around, looking after the drought, doing all those jobs you're supposed to do, getting your grapes back into Vietnam, doing all the things that are required of you, opening free trade agreements. But when it turns into turmoil, it turns into 80% politics and 20% business, and that's not what you're supposed to do. So you've got to act diligently, walk quietly, turn up to work on time, concentrate on your job.
Okay, sure, but we know the stability of the government depends on effective relations between the two coalition parties, the Liberals and the Nationals. We know there's a history here in terms of National Party attitudes towards Malcolm Turnbull, so I'm just asking you directly, how big a problem is this?
Well, I get along very well with Malcolm. We've had policy differences in the past on the emissions trading scheme and the carbon tax, obviously. But
that's the key issue, though, isn't it? I mean, where do you think he's at on that now?
Well, I'll let Malcolm speak for Malcolm. But he's a very capable person, and this is not about Malcolm, and it's not about me. It's not about anybody. It's about our nation, making sure our nation's on a proper path. And we have, and Malcolm is part of the cabinet. The cabinet is unified behind Tony Abbott, and that's what the Australian people want to see, because we've got work to do.
Would the National Party in any way accept a change in climate change policy and a conditional move back towards some form of carbon pricing?
Look, we already have forms of issues that are dealing with climate change. We just want to make sure that we don't turn the economy upside down to do it. And remember, our constituents are the poorest. That we've always got to remember that. The richest constituents are actually represented by the Greens. Then you've got the Liberal Party, then you've got the Labor Party. The poorest, on average, are represented by us. So we must maintain dignity in their lives.
Mr. Joyce,
and when we talk about their house, we think about their power price. We talk about the life of the person, the weatherboard, and I'm predominantly on a street, to be honest.
Can I ask a question about you? You just mentioned a few minutes ago that you won't be Agriculture Minister forever. You're aware that I interviewed Doug Anthony a few months ago. He's one of the National Party's greats, former Deputy Prime Minister. He tapped you as the party's next leader in that interview, said you'd make a great Deputy Prime Minister. Is this something that you aspire to one day?
Let's get this. I'm going to support Warren for as long as Warren wants a job, and I'll tell you why. Because he's the most experienced cabinet minister. Because every time we have to reach back into that vessel of experience and say what's going on here, is Warren who says, we've been here before and I'm going to tell you all about it. Warren and I make, to be honest, a good team, because Warren is the more Lutheran Dow, quiet, and I'm slightly more emotive. But at a time in the future, at Warren's choosing, there'll be a ballot within the National Party for which I will be a candidate, and I imagine others will be as well. And I'm trying to be as honest and as I can on that, and that hopefully keeps the decks clear.
We finally saw last week the dumping of the paid parental leave scheme, but I think a lot of sensible people at least were shocked that all that money is now going to be used to be spent on childcare, which is an area where, well, essentially government involvement has been a disaster. What's your take on that?
Well, initially we heard that childcare was what people wanted. I mean, they were saying we don't like this because we want greater.
But you have a deficit of $40 billion, and we're going to spend another $2 billion on childcare. I'm sure we should save that money.
We have to try and make sure we keep people in the workforce. If we can't just have, if we're going to try and, the magic riddle to this, when people talk about how we balance the books, I always say, Well, it's quite simple. You either increase your revenues, and you were talking about this before, or you decrease your expenses if you want to try and turn things around. And if you can't, the result is increasing debt. Now, there's also this other sort of magic pudding one, which is we'll grow the economy. You know, when I can't think of either answers, or I won't be straight with an answer, I say grow the economy. Well, if you're going to do that, you have to have people participating in the workforce, and you have to be opening up new platforms of infrastructure to build a growing economy on. And to have people in the workforce, you've got to have them at work, and if you don't have childcare, then they're at home.
All right, Barnaby Joyce, the Agriculture Minister, we appreciate you flying down and being here for this interview. Thanks very much.
My pleasure.